Hi, friends. Welcome back to the Bare and Brutal podcast, the podcast where we bare our feelings and are brutally honest while highlighting stories of resilience and transforming pain into power. I'm your host, Michelle, and today we have an extraordinary guest with us who is on a mission to share her powerful healing journey and the transformative impact of somatic practices. As a survivor of CPTSD and a future somatic practitioner, Lena has a wealth of experience and insights to offer us today, so I'm really excited. We'll explore her courageous journey through healing, different modalities of therapy, and how to find the right one for you, because we all know that that's a process in itself and it's rough. So we'll hear about that and also the transformative power of somatic work. She's passionate about mind body connection, and really her goal is to educate and inspire others through her content. So please join me in welcoming Lena to the show. Thanks for joining us, Lena.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
I'm so excited that we connected. I say this every time on my podcast, but I literally get so giddy when I meet new people because I'm very much an introvert. And this podcast has pushed me to forced me to talk to people, to strangers, one. And it's just been beautiful connecting with people all across. Where are you located again? Is it Colorado?
Yeah, so I'm in Denver, and I totally agree. I was like super excited when you had first reached out just to say hello, and then I like looked into the podcast, and I was like, wow, this is really great content. Like, I'd love to collaborate with you. So I'm glad that like it's forcing you to like socialize. I feel like content creation in general forces us to like reach out and make
Yeah.
connections, which is always great.
Yeah. Well, I would love it if you could introduce yourself to the audience and just share a bit about your background and what exactly inspired you to pursue this career as a somatic practitioner and also as a content creator.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and introduce myself. I am Lena. I am based in Denver, Colorado, but I'm actually from the Northern Virginia area. Was an East Coast kid my whole life. But yeah, I mean, as far as like what we're talking about today and why I'm on here, I started the Open Heart Collective not too long ago, earlier this year. And it's basically inspired from like my healing journey when it comes to like mental health, healing my relationship to my body, healing through trauma, a lot of like different things.
Yeah.
And so the page was kind of born, the idea for the collective was born from seeing how impactful actually introducing somatic work and body work and that real like mind body connection, how important that was for me to actually make any progress in my healing. And I know like we live in a time in a world that's super disconnected. And so I thought it would be, I've always wanted to help people, and somatic work I think is probably for me the best way to be able to do that. So
Yeah. Yeah. So, can you talk about somatic work? What is it? Please enlighten the listeners exactly what that entails.
so basically we all know about like normal Western therapy, talk therapy. You sit in a room and you talk to a therapist, and there are like ranging good and bad therapists. But,
Yeah.
it's the idea that we sit and we talk and we verbally process through a lot of the different things that are either going on today in our life, have happened in the past, and just try to make connections and really figure out a way to like move forward.
Yeah.
And for me, I think, as someone who, and we'll like get into the story, but as someone who grew up and experienced a lot of like complex trauma, which is what complex PTSD is. It's trauma over a prolonged period of time.
Hmm.
And so, when I was a kid, I really struggled with like the mind body relation, or the body image relationship, and that mind body connection, not feeling super connected to like my own inner world.
Hmm.
And when I got into talk therapy, it wasn't until I was like 19 things had really like come to a head in life, and I was like, okay, I have to go and talk to someone and like figure out how to feel better. But I think, and I did that for several years, maybe like 5 years, until we actually introduced body work and somatic practice. And so the word soma means body. Somatic work is really any body-based practice, so it can be things ranging from different breathing exercises, so like breath work, meditation, yoga, any form of dance, physical movement. And then, of course, there are like other techniques that incorporate things like tapping, which is used in EMDR and reprocessing. It helps to basically bring your prefrontal cortex online so that you're like actually able to reprocess information and use different parts of your brain to help you do that more effectively. So yeah, there's a wide range of somatic techniques that can be incorporated in the somatic work.
Thank you for giving the whole description to it. That was really informative for myself even. I'm on my healing
Yeah,
journey
of
like we've
course.
discussed before. I would love it if you could speak more on what was your catalyst that led you to begin this whole healing journey. I know we spoke previously together about what it was, but could you talk about that and share your experience?
Yes, absolutely. So I like when I story tell, I'm like big on context. And so I think to understand like the turning point, I'm going to take it back a little bit. I think we as people, as in adulthood, we're very heavily affected by the things that happen in childhood, right? Like, so your entire life, it's the full picture. One of the big things for me as a kid was, and I had like an overall really great upbringing and like childhood, and I had a lot of family, and you know, seemingly like everything was great, but internally, I really struggled with body image. I had an eating disorder that officially started when I was 14, but like all of the things related to it, the pressure of like dieting and weight loss, like all of that started from like the age of 5, of like this message of like your body is not okay, it needs to change, and when it changes, other people around you will be happy with it. You know, like it was never this concept of like this body belongs to me, it's mine, it's for my enjoyment, life, whatever you want to call it. Like it was in my head, it was always like your body's a problem and it needs to be fixed. And I think when you're really young, it's really hard to conceptualize like something so like intimate and feeling so completely disconnected from it, because it's like, okay, well, now this is a tool that I actually don't really have control over. I mean, even like, and like I love my parents, but they had their own distortions around food and eating. And so for me, like super young, I got this message that like I couldn't even like, I didn't even really have a choice in what I was eating, you know, and it was always the goal of like, you need to lose weight or look a certain way or whatever, which looking back, like I was actually a pretty small kid, you know, like, so, you know, but yeah, so I think that started a lot of that mind body disconnect. A lot of me trying to cope with difficult emotions, pressures and stress of like everyday life in ways that weren't necessarily like helpful, ways that like I could just escape mentally. And you know, sometimes that like, again, later on it developed into an eating disorder when you have a lot of anxiety and you're like, I don't really know what else to control. You try to control food. And I think it, you know, can be a lot of different ways that we numb out and even further disconnect from our body. And so when I got older, the thing that kind of like, you know, I knew around college, once I got out on my own and I started dealing with like bouts of depression, I started getting super anxious, I'd have panic attacks, and all of these things were happening that I didn't necessarily understand or like have a word for. I think a lot of like, you know, when you're a kid, you just come up with these weird little ways to cope. And then once you're an adult and you go out into the world, you realize what's normal and what's not. And like, then it kind of all comes to a head. And I think even in the literature, like if you look it up, most mental illness or disorders are not diagnosed until early adulthood, 18, 20s, because that's once you're like out in the world and having to function, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that like was part of the reason that I started to go to therapy, started to look for help to kind of just feel better and not be sad all the time.
Yeah.
That started things, but it wasn't until I was like, I think I was like 22, when I got into a relationship with someone that like I thought I was just like completely in love. It was super quick that I became like infatuated and really fell for this person. And, you know, they presented themselves a certain way that like matched everything that I wanted. And I think like, yeah. So I was like, oh, this is my person. Like, this is perfect. Everything's going to be great from here. And that was not the case. It ended up being a extremely toxic and not even just toxic. I think that's like a lighter way to put like very abusive relationship, emotionally, financially, like every way but physical abuse existed. And I think that kept me even longer because it took me a while to even realize it was abuse. And so when I like ended up eventually having to leave that situation a little over 2 years later. That was really the moment where I was like, there were so many things that I'd lost from that relationship. You know, I'd lost my relationship with my family, wasn't lost, but it was like in a really bad way.
Yeah.
My relationships with some of my friends I had lost. I had dropped out of college at that point. I quit my job. Like there were so many things that I just, like everything I felt like I worked so hard for was just gone. And it was just this person was left, and I knew that I needed to get away from them. And so I really think like leaving that, and I remember the day that I like made that decision when I was really like at rock bottom. I was like, wow, it's either like I need to change this situation, or I don't know where I'm going to end up. I don't know what's going to happen. And that was the point where like I feel like I almost heard like a voice. You know, I'm very spiritual, I'm not religious, but like it was like this voice in my head that was not like my regular inner voice. It was just like, no, like it was very angry, and it was like, you've got to do something. Like we're not staying here. And so that was kind of like when I really got serious. And I think that was the catalyst for like my actual healing to begin.
Wow. Well, one, I just want to talk about the journey growing up, dealing with body issues. I resonate so deeply. Twins. I also had an eating disorder, started around the same age, 13, 14. And I think growing up being raised by immigrants, there's a specific way that there's a stereotype, right, for what you should look like as a woman. And that was definitely put on, those expectations were placed on me too growing up. And so feel you there, girl. That's tough stuff. And I also really resonate with like the feeling like I was so uncomfortable when it came to anything that related to my body. Like, so I remember when I was going to therapy, they were asking me to, I think it was a form of somatic therapy where they're telling me to like pay attention to things going on in my body, how I felt with things. And that made me so, so incredibly uncomfortable because I was like, I don't want to think about my body. I don't want to be perceived. Like, I don't want anything to do with that. So thank you for just talking that. I'd love to touch more on that later. But I really want to also affirm your story being in a relationship. I think my listeners, at least for me too, I can really relate getting into a relationship when you're young and feeling like, oh my gosh, this is my person. Like we're ride or die. We're in it for the long haul. I'm gonna be married. And it was like probably a bunch of love bombing in the beginning. You're like, oh, I'm being treated so well, and then all of a sudden the switch up comes, and you're like, wait, what just happened? Like, I thought we were cool, and now you're saying all these things to me. So I would like it if you could maybe speak on what were some of the initial steps that you took towards healing after making that difficult decision, because it is so hard. I mean, you said it took you like 2 years to make that decision to leave.
Yeah. And also we'll get back to what you said, but I also really connected to the whole, like, I talk about somatic work now, but like the beginning was very comfortable, and we can absolutely go back to that and dive into like what that feels like when you're first starting, because it is definitely foreign. But yeah, I think, I think a lot of people, like you said, have been in relationships where it all started out and you thought it was perfect, and you very quickly find out that like it's not what you signed up for. And so just a little bit of context on that. I was 22. The person that I fell in love with was 29 at the time. So there's a significant age difference, especially when you're that young.
Wow.
And so yeah, I think it's important to touch on that because there is a little bit of like a power dynamic there, right?
Girl.
I mean, especially when you're just like, because I was going to college at the time. I was going to like a really prestigious school. This person did not go to the school. There was someone I met like outside of the school environment. And so it's like, again, you're young, but you're also like starting out in life, and you think you know everything, and you meet someone who's even older and you think they must be more mature and they must know what they're talking about. So, I think that was part of it too. But yeah, that relationship, like it was only 2 years, and the 2 years in the span of a lifetime is like not a lot, right? But I think it is the most significant 2 years of my life. I think, when I talk about having an eating disorder from a young age, that comes with a lot. It comes with a lot of self-loathing. It comes with low self-esteem, comes with not feel, and even other traumas, right?
Yes.
Like trauma sometimes makes you feel like you are bad. And that's really like what shame is. There's a lot of shame around, people who survive any sort of trauma. And so there's the shame lives inside of you if you don't deal with it. And the idea is like, there must be something wrong with me. It must have been something that I did, that these bad things are happening. And so when I met this person and I got into this relationship, and then they started to kind of switch and affirm those fears, like, yeah, it is you. There is something wrong with you. You're too much to love. And I'm the only person that's going to love you. That's like, oh, I've been telling myself that already. And now here's another person saying it to me in real life. And it's a mind. Can I cuss? Is that allowed?
Yeah. Yes, you can cuss. A mind fuck. Yeah.
So that was like, really like what set it up. And another thing is this person like really did not have much in the way financially. I mean, they presented themselves as like full grown adult, had a job, all these different things. But then when we actually got together, I found out that really wasn't the case. This person was in sales, but it was the kind of like sales where you go to door. So if you don't get up and go door to door, you're not going to make any money, right? So and I say that because it then added this extra layer to the relationship because they ended up moving in.
Wow.
Yes. And remember, I'm in college. Okay, I barely have enough to take care of myself. Like my parents are still helping out with certain things. And it's like now I'm also working, right? And it was supposed to be like working for my fun money. Now I'm working and supporting me and this other dude that's like, I think I'm going to end up marrying one day, which whole thing. Yeah. But I say all that to say because like our lives got so intertwined and I really truly felt like I was like, I needed this person. Like the way that I loved them was not a healthy version. I will never love someone that way again because it was not a healthy or like real form of love. Yeah. And when you feel like you're dependent on someone, leaving that situation, there was times where I had tried to leave multiple times where I kicked him out. Yeah. Like it was a cycle on and off for 2 years. And I think the end of it was, there was a lot of things that were going on with me mental health wise. I was really struggling with physical and mental health at the time. And this person knew that. And they kind of preyed on that too. And so when things were like at rock bottom and I just realized that it was never going to get better and that this person, I kept on uncovering like more and more depth to how dangerous this person was. And finally it's like, kind of just clicked where I was like, I don't want this to be my life forever. And so after like I made that decision and leaving, I think the first step that I took was I had some bad habits. I relied on, I was in college at the time. I was experimenting with substances and I had things that I was prescribed like to help with my mental health. But I think numbing out and escaping was a big thing for me whenever I was overwhelmed. A lot of people who deal with trauma go through that. And so the first step for me was just to get completely sober off of everything. Yeah. At least for a certain amount of time where I felt like, because the relationship had fucked up my head so much. And I'm like, now I just need a clear mind and I need to like go get help from someone. So that was the first thing I did was like physically kind of detox and then seeking like professional help. Because at the time I started working with a therapist that I work with now, who's the best therapist in the world. But yeah, that was when I had like reached out to her because we had worked together years before, but she didn't have a private practice. I had met her in eating disorder treatment. And so years later, after I had left that relationship and I'd kind of like detoxed a little bit and I was ready to do like the mental, spiritual, emotional work, she was the person that I reconnected with.
Wow. Well, that is amazing. We love connecting with great therapists because it is a whole process, definitely finding the right one for you. So I'm so glad that you're able to have that relationship, find a good therapist, especially in your time of need. I would love it if we could transition. That's a really good segue into one of my other questions is how can someone find the right kind of therapy for them? Because there's multiple different therapeutic modalities, right? How do you know which one works for you? And can you speak on the ones that you have personally found a lot of breakthroughs with?
Absolutely. Yeah. So let's see, I started therapy at almost 10 years ago. Yeah. So I was like 19 when it started, and I'm about to be 29 this month. So there was a lot of trial and error. I'd had a lot of therapists, like, because, I was in college for part of that time, moving around. So I've had a lot of different therapists until, I found the one that I work with now and have been working with. But I think one of the big things for me when I'm evaluating like a good or bad therapist is, what do we talk about in session? Like, because a lot of people will say, do you like them? And it's like, I can like a lot of people. I'm pretty easy to get along with. I think I just like people. But for me, it's like, yes, of course you have to like your therapist. You have to like have a relationship that forms. But also I think the biggest difference is like for the therapists where I felt like I really wasn't getting anything out of my time with them.
Mm-hmm.
It's because I would come into session and we talk about how my week was. We would talk about what happened yesterday. We talk about like, we just like shoot the breeze,
Yeah.
And like sometimes they would connect that to deeper things, but in all honesty, like it just felt like we were tackling the issue of the day. And I think for someone, especially anyone who's endured trauma, like a lot of the times, this is what my therapist now uses the term like tangled. So like if something happens in my day now, if I get triggered by like an issue at work or my boss yelled at me or whatever, right? Like, yes, we can talk about that specific instance, but what I really want to know is, why did it hurt me so much? Like, why did I have the reaction that I had, or why did this cause me anxiety? And then that's when you really like untangle, like, okay, what are the feelings from this present incident? And then what are the feelings that are being triggered from whatever part of my life or whatever part of me? And like, how do we start to like deal with that, like the underlying part of it? So that's a big part of it when I look for a good therapist, for sure.
Yeah. So I definitely relate. I have had my fair share of trial and error with therapists. And I definitely feel you. It's like, I'm not paying $130 per session for us to talk like we're on FaceTime right now. Me personally, I need some direction, And I feel like people get easily discouraged, at least I did, when they find a therapist and it just doesn't, vibe with them or doesn't work. I'd like to hear more about specifically, I think you said IFS work in that like a therapy modality. Can you explain what IFS therapy is and how that has helped you do the work and uncover those things, like you're saying, like the feelings, why you're triggered, all that stuff?
Yeah, of course. And not to skip over your other question, I just feel like I talk a lot, so I want to like give you a second. But as far as like the modalities I tried that didn't work, there was like CBT, which me mentioning these modalities does not make them bad modalities. They are just ones that did not work for me.
Right.
CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy. It's a lot to do with thought changing and therapy around how to think differently, which I think is important. But for me, again, it just wasn't enough. I'm someone who intellectualizes my feelings already. And I think, like I said, for me, I just needed more like that incorporated like more of my body. DBT, I think, has some really great coping skills. But again, that alone just wasn't enough for me. And then I started to do EMDR. I think EMDR is an absolutely wonderful trauma reprocessing therapy. I think that you need to definitely be ready for it. So it's not something that I would recommend like right off the bat, although, everyone's experiences are different. But I think like you mentioned, like IFS was really what worked for me and what inspired a lot of me looking into other things that incorporated body work. But internal family systems or IFS therapy, sometimes you'll hear it called parts work or parts therapy, but it's this idea that, as humans we have different parts of ourselves. So like when you're talking about maybe a decision you have to make, and you're like, oh, well, part of me is really excited, but part of me is kind of scared. Like that's a real thing. It's a real psychological phenomenon. And like IFS basically takes the idea that there are these different parts of us, and they're usually categorized into like exiles. So the like really, really inner wounded part that we like don't want to look at, don't want to deal with. It's usually a much younger part, your inner child, like whatever you want to call it. So that would be like an exile part. There are also managers, right? So things like our perfectionist part, or micromanaging, like these manager types that come in and try to help protect and kind of control the situation, right? And then there's the firefighters, which are the parts that kind of come out in emergency when like you're completely triggered. And so for a lot of people, this is a lot of different kinds of escape, like addiction, alcoholism, gambling, eating disorders, like these really usually intense maladaptive coping skills. And what I love about like this modality and this theory is that all of these parts are here for a reason. They're all here to help. They're all here to protect us. And there's no such thing as bad parts. And actually the founder of IFS wrote a book called No Bad Parts, all about IFS and the basics of it. And I just love that idea, because I think, again, for people who have endured trauma, shame is a big part of that. And so the point of this therapy isn't to change, get rid of, or silence any of these parts. It's really to sit with them and kind of come together and be able to learn, discover, get to know each one of these parts differently, so that you're able to understand why they're there and help make different choices, like based off of those connections and those relationships with yourself.
Wow. I have definitely seen IFS or parts work come up on my timeline, and I remember reading things, and it's definitely something that I am personally interested in exploring more too, because I think I've got some inner child things that I need to deal with. So thank you for sharing your knowledge on that. What would you say specifically is something that was most beneficial for you coming from doing IFS work?
Yeah. And so kind of to get back to what you said like earlier about being uncomfortable, having to first start dealing with your body in therapy. And so I'll go back to that. Like for me, the first time we started actually dealing or incorporating parts of my body other than just like my mind was an eating disorder treatment. And like there was like a mirror activity, where you would sit and like have to like look at different parts of yourself, hear about all these things. And just like you, the first time someone told me to like give like a really cheesy like compliment about a certain part of my body, or just like do like a body scan like you were talking about, the first time I sat in a yoga therapy class, it was in eating disorder treatment. And I remember being so pissed off that I even had to go. I was like, I don't want to do this. Laying there and having to like breathe and listen to what was, and it was just like, I hated it. I get that. I do. Because it's so foreign, it's so unfamiliar. And so it's funny because thinking about where I was then and how I felt so strongly about not wanting to talk to my body, like now today, like the biggest part of IFS that has been helpful and I thought was so stupid when I first had to do it was, when something would happen or when I would become really upset by an event, and they ask you like, okay, what part of you is activated right now? Like what part of you feels this way? Can you tell me how old that part is? Can you let that part talk? Or like these different things where you actually like, I'm sitting in session with my therapist. Sometimes I'll close my eyes because it's awkward to have someone looking at you while I'm listening to and then like all over my eyes, and I'll tell them kind of, and it's really weird, but it's like you're speaking from that part. There are times where it's like, once you're really connecting to these different pieces of you and where they're coming from, it gets really, really cool, because as you go on and as you do the work now, even like outside of session, like when I'm really upset or something's really bothering me, my anxiety, and I like want to escape or I want to do something that I know isn't super healthy, I immediately ask myself, okay, what part is activated? Like what part of me is upset? I can close my eyes, do the same thing. It's like hand over heart, and really like going inward and asking like, what's going on? Like, is it little Lena? Is it like lost Lena? Like I've named these different parts for different times in my life, but like really being able to be like, okay, what is it? And to just listen. And my favorite part of that is like, my therapist will always ask like, okay, what does this part need to hear? What does this part need to feel? Sometimes it's just validation. Sometimes like the little part of me needs a hug, like someone to tell it everything. Yeah. Like every part needs different things at different times. And like I said, at first it felt real weird, but it is absolutely like the one modality that I truly use constantly. And it was the first one that I felt like I could apply outside of session, instead of like, I can't break out my CBT chart right now, or like, do X, Y, and Z. This just felt a lot more like at home
Yeah.
for me. And it really helped foster that relationship to being inside of my body and feeling like it's a safe place. Because
Yeah.
now I don't just have these random panic or pressure or sadness that's coming up. It's like, okay, something's happening. Let's figure out why.
Yeah.
And then I actually do feel a lot better after I've had my moment with that part.
Well, it's so powerful that you have these tools now to help you process through these really real things that you're experiencing. I think one, the whole mind body connection thing. I'm like listening to this, I'm deeply uncomfortable because I know that I need to do that work because I also really intellectualize my feelings. You know, I can sit in CBT therapy and be like, oh, I know that I feel this way because of this, and it's probably because for my childhood and all these things. So it's really hard for me to, I can talk all day about why and understand why I feel these things, but actually processing it and feeling that emotion, nope. Like, I'm good, I don't want to do that. So can you elaborate on this mind body connection and how someone like me or my listeners can begin to just explore and strengthen their own mind body connection? How do we approach that?
100%. And I love how you asked it like someone like you or someone like your listeners. Honestly, someone like me, like that was me like a couple of years ago. I wanted nothing to do with all this fuzzy stuff, right? Like I just want to sit there and tell you this is why I did this and this was the year that this happened, you know, because again, I think I don't ever want to like diminish how important awareness is because before we were able to understand like and intellectualize our feelings, we had no awareness of it at all, right? So I always think that awareness is the first step. I think it's just like we can get stuck there. And so for what you're, you know, asking about like how do we kind of begin to explore, tease that out, I think for me, it started super early before I even really like, you know, when I went to treatment for my eating disorder, they had given us tools like yoga or art or like these different things, meditation, which I thought I could never meditate. Love meditation now, but like I have a so I was like, my brain won't shut up. Like, no. And so, you know, all these different things. And I really just, when they were first presented to me, I thought of them as just like these little tools I could break out when I was stressed or whatever. But I think it just starts really small. I think, you know, as simple as like box breathing. Like I remember when they first started trying to teach me breathing techniques for my anxiety because I would get very intense panic attacks. And I'm like, dude, I'm freaking out. Give me a Xanax. Like, don't talk to me about I'm like, I need the drugs.
I don't want to count or talk about my 5 senses.
Yeah. Which to be fair, like when you are having a panic attack, that is not the best time to first start trying deep breathing exercises, right? But I think if you like, when you're in a good place, like even in a day-to-day, like take a second to just even do, like you said, a body scan, like sit there, take a few deep breaths, close your eyes, think about like, what am I feeling right now in my body? So, you know, whether it's like a moment where you feel like you're starting to get irritated, like there are physical cues that our body will give us, right? When we're angry, our blood starts to feel warmer, or, you know, your heart starts to race a little when you're excited or whatever it might be. I think sometimes we just have to take a second to be present with that. And that can look like taking a second, taking a few breaths, asking yourself to like check in. And then I think it also turns into like, let yourself sit in silence for like 10 minutes, throw on a guided meditation. Like I still just now, like maybe a year ago, I started getting into meditation where I wasn't using any guided like language, but especially as someone who like might have ADHD or might have a pretty active mind, like the goal of meditation is not to shut off your mind completely. It's really to spend some time with yourself, trying as best as you can to just listen to your inner world. And so I think guided meditation, small 5-10 minute meditations are a really cool way to just start and get introduced to it. I think yoga is great. You know, everybody's different. Everybody finds their way to this work differently. For some people who might be super athletic, it might be through like dance and like more of that kind of movement. But I think just finding little ways that you can be present with yourself day to day, not just mentally, but like physically be mindful of your surroundings. That's a really good way to just kind of start.
Yeah, for sure. For meditation, I think there's this almost like a stigma around it. I mean, people think, oh, meditation is so woo-woo, like I'm really gonna sit in a room and close my eyes and breathe and like listen to the the first time I listened to a guided meditation, I just busted out laughing because like the voice is like, please close your eyes feelings and like I couldn't take it seriously. But I have been bringing meditation into my daily practices. I'm trying to, and I have seen benefits. I'm like, okay, maybe they're onto something. Like maybe this is helpful. But you're right, it's not about being like 100% relaxed or no thoughts behind your head. It's more like taking time to
Mhm.
intentionally sit with yourself and just take a moment to have some quiet like time, because I think we're constantly exposed to so many things like our phones, social media, work, and so meditation is a great practice. So thank you for talking about that.
Yeah, and it's funny, like when you mentioned the like meditation voice and everything, it's like all of these different things are going to be really awkward at first. And like especially when it came to meditation, there's a specific like YouTube channel. I think they're called like The Honest Guys. They have British accents, and there's just something relaxing about it to me, So it's like I was just laughing at that because I'm like, I totally get that. But I think like on this kind of wraps into like final thoughts too, is like sitting here and talking about all of the things that I use now, right, in my healing, and things that have like really helped me transform and come over certain roadblocks. Again, that doesn't mean I'm like fully healed. I don't think there's really such thing as being fully healed with a D. Right. I think that humans, like, we're constantly evolving. Yeah. We're constantly going to have to work through things. But, there was a time where all of the stuff that I do now seemed completely just out of reach, or like you said, too woo-woo, or like I just didn't see how it could help me, right? Like, don't tell me to breathe, don't tell me to meditate, don't tell me to do X, Y, and Z. It just sounds dumb. It can't be that simple. Like, that can't heal years of trauma, right? And I think that I was very wrong. I think that it's baby steps. I think you still need the help and guidance of like, whether it's a therapist, mentor, spiritual program, whatever you like belong to, whatever is helpful to help guide you through some of that work. Because I am someone who believes that we don't heal alone. I do think you need community, and I do think that we heal in relation to others. So yeah, I think the biggest thing is just like, it's going to be awkward. It's going to be weird. And also it's going to feel really hard. Like, healing and trauma work is extremely difficult. Yeah. And sometimes you feel like you're getting worse before you get better. But I mean, if I had to go back and do it all over again, it's 1000% worth it. I don't know who I would be or where I would be. I don't think I would have half of the things that bring me joy the way they do today if I hadn't gone through the difficult experiences and had to, like, even the difficult experience of choosing to heal and to do things differently. So I just always say, like, it's worth it. And if you're curious, just kind of put your feelers out there, start doing things that feel easy. And like I said, I do think that healing your relationship with your mind and body is always more than worth it.
Thank you so much for coming on here, sharing your knowledge, your experiences, and just talking with me. This conversation in itself was very healing. We'll be wrapping the episode up here now, but before we go, how can our audience connect with you and learn more about your work, and where can our listeners find you to follow your content?
I have the Open Heart Collective page on Instagram. It's open.heart.collective. And then I have like just the first digital product I put out. It's just a freebie download of like the self-inventory workbook, which is actually something that I originally created just personally for myself when I was going through a really rough time last year after like moving across the country and trying to get back in touch with myself on like a daily basis. So I always recommend kind of just starting there. But yeah, there's my page. And then I'm also currently getting certified as a integrative somatic practitioner, which should be wrapped up and certified later this year. So I'll definitely have more offerings on the page there. I would love to then be able to start working with clients like one-on-one, virtually. That would be awesome. So stay tuned.
Well, thank you again for coming on the show today. Those of you listening, if you'd like to follow along with Lena's journey becoming a somatic practitioner, or just educate yourself further on healing trauma or witness more mindful content, please go show her some love. She's amazing.
Thanks so much, Michelle. I really appreciate you having me on the show. And like I said, I love Bare and Brutal. people. So keep doing your thing.
Yes. Well, everyone, you can find Lena's socials and links all in the show notes. Her page is an amazing resource, so be sure to check it out. Thanks again, Lena, and thank you everyone for listening. And as always, I will talk to you soon. Bye.